I don't think there's anybody who's a serious alcoholic that doesn't know they're an alcoholic. The question is how difficult it is to change. For me, it was so difficult because I felt that I could never have fun again. But once you're there, you're there. But it's a very difficult problem for a lot of people. And I feel for them because there but for the grace of God go I. And it's not an easy trip. We each have to do our own thing. I needed this intervention. I needed to realize that I was dying, and I was dying. My liver was giving out. I was going to lose my wife, basically lose my life, and I had to make a choice. Do I want to live or do I want to die? And I chose life.
Howdy, and welcome to the show. Cooper's Code focuses on legal issues and notable practitioners, distilling wisdom so we all achieve the best results for our clients. I'm Miles Cooper, and I'm thrilled to share this conversation with the legendary Gary Gwilliam. Gary, along with his partners and talented team, runs an Oakland-based consumer practice whose efforts have had national impact. Gary has tried over 180 jury trials and has received every accolade, award, and acknowledgement during his 61 years in practice. While Gary's accomplishments are legion, there's one that impacts everyone. In 1988, Gary served as the California Trial Lawyers Association president. He led the successful fight against Proposition 104, an attempt by the insurance companies and big corporate interests to cap contingent attorneys' fees and bar access to justice for those who cannot afford to hire high hourly rate lawyers. Gary is a whole person lawyer, and as anyone who has read his autobiography knows, he lives out loud. He's been a gang member and a fraternity brother with Chris Christopherson. He barely graduated high school, yet went on to graduate from Berkeley Law. He comes from Mormon stock and is an alcoholic. He pours everything into his cases and has taken the time to step back and do deep dives into his spirituality and being. So please sit back and enjoy as we talk cases, initiative battles, stress in the practice, and everything in between. Welcome to the show, Gary.
Thank you, Miles. Nice to be here.
I want to start generally where I usually start, with a little bit of background in terms of where you grew up and some of the steps that happened to you along the way before you became a lawyer. Is that an okay place to start?
Fine.
So I understand you grew up in Ogden, Utah, you were born in Ogden, Utah.
Yeah, I was born in Ogden, Utah. I left there when I was about 3 and moved to Eugene, Oregon, after my mother had divorced my father, who was an alcoholic, and remarried my stepdad. So I really grew up in Eugene up through high school, and then I went to Seattle, Washington.
In terms of high school, and I like touching on this because my mentor and boss, Bill Veen, was in a motorcycle gang when he was young and then went on to be a very successful lawyer. And there's apparently a commonality. Were you in a gang?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I kind of went off. I mean, I had been a pretty good kid when I was young. I wasn't real popular, but when I moved up to Seattle, Washington, and I went up there in my junior year, I'd started smoking and drinking. I'm 16 years old, and my folks were kind of party people, so I was kind of into it. So I gravitated immediately to people that did that, and before long, I moved into a much rougher crowd, and then pretty soon I became part of a local gang. We called ourselves the Turks, but I actually put a tattoo on my hand. It was the mark of the Turkish flag with a little thing and 3 marks on it, a little bit like the Pachucos, who were the big gangs at that time. But I was, I carried a switchblade knife. I stole cars. I did a lot of things. But basically, we were into partying and trying to find pot, which was very hard to get at the time, and drinking and carrying on. And I had a car. My parents had no idea, my mother, of what was happening to me. She was very busy with her selling. And so I got deep into it, scarily deep.
Did most of your fellow gang members graduate from high school?
No, there were about 20 of us in our gang that ran around. 3 of us graduated from high school. One of them committed suicide. The other one went to prison, and I'm the third.
Wow.
So
it sounds like your mom figured something was going on and came up with an arrangement for you to find a different path.
Yeah, one day she came out and I had this mark in my hand, and she came to me and says, Gary, she says, would you wash that thing off? I don't like it. And I said, I didn't say anything. week or two later, she says, Gary, let's smoke this thing off. And I said, Mom, it's a tattoo. What do you mean? She starts scrubbing on it. And then she started crying. And I felt really bad because I had a good relationship with my mother. But basically, she recognized, and I did too, that I was getting into really deep trouble. I can go into more detail if you want. But I did graduate from high school. I barely got out of high school. And my biological father, who I had not had any dealings with, I'd only seen him 3 times since I could remember, was successful in Ogden, Utah. So in Glendora, he lived on Glendora, and so my grandmother came up. She was a tough old Mormon woman, a pioneer woman. She called my biological father's name Jack. She says, Jack, your son's in trouble. Get your ass up here and take care of him. So he came up in his Cadillac and drove me down to Glendora, and I moved in with my stepmom and 3 half-sisters that I didn't know, and my life dramatically changed.
You mentioned that your father was an alcoholic. He went through recovery, though.
Oh, yeah. He was one of the 5 founding members of AA in the state of Utah, very active in Alcoholics Anonymous. As a matter of fact, he tried to get me into AA when I was still a young kid drinking. And I think that kind of turned me off to the formal AA program. But to his credit, he stayed sober all his life.
In terms of that turning around your life, can you elaborate a little bit on what path forward, as far as college is concerned? Did you go straight into a 4-year? Did you do something else?
No. I couldn't get into any 4-year school, nowhere. So I ended up going to a junior college, a community college called Citrus Junior College. And it was in Azusa, which is right next to Glendora, which is about 35 miles east of Los Angeles. And I just flourished. I mean, all of a sudden, I'd been smart enough, obviously, if I wanted to put myself into it. So I really started studying, and I really enjoyed what I was doing. I started getting myself in good shape. I really did want to leave the gang stuff behind. I knew I was in deep trouble. I hadn't gotten to the point where I'd really been hurt or seriously arrested, but I was really on the edge up there, and I didn't want to be there anymore. But I still partied and had a good time. But then after 2 years of school there, they had a big contest for man most likely to succeed. And fortunately, I won that. And my mother came down, was very proud of me. And that was one of the highlights of my life, was the fact that I'd made such a dramatic change in 2 years and got this really nice watch that I still keep that says man most likely to succeed, 1957. And it was a whole new world. And then I got accepted into Pomona College, which was down the road, which is really a good school. And life changed there too. And I went into a fraternity that again changed my life again, with a hard drinking, fun bunch of guys. So,
We'll talk a little bit about alcohol and its role in your life as we go forward. There's a commonality I'm hearing, though, in terms of the gang and the fraternity, and I think we'll hear it in early trial lawyer phase,
right,
of being a hard charger and a hard drinker. And can you elaborate a little bit about how those two overlapped for you in terms of stress management and life and everything?
Well, I remember very distinctly the first time that I drank, and I was just turned 16, I think, and there was a party, and I took a beer, and I got high, and immediately the first time I got high, I loved it. I loved alcohol, and I really enjoyed partying. And I think because I was not popular, I was a little more on the shy side. The alcohol brought out a extrovert part to me, and I became kind of a party guy, and people loved it. I was in the gang, there was a lot of drinking that I could get away with, and other drugs that I took. Alcohol was always my drug of choice. I took a little marijuana and played with heroin a little bit, but I was always alcohol for me. And the hard drinking fraternity was a part of that. And then when I became a lawyer and started, there was a lot of hard drinking in those years when I was in the 60s and the 70s. And when I first became the president of our local trial lawyers association, 74, 75, we would have, when I went to the trial lawyers, what is now Consumer Attorneys of California, it was California Trial Lawyers, we would open the bar at 11 o'clock in the morning and start drinking at the board meeting. That has all changed. But I loved the hard drinking. It was all part of what I could do. And I loved alcohol, but at some stage I realized alcohol didn't love me anymore.
I want to go back at the risk of opening cans of worms. There was a phrase that you used, and lawyers are trained to pay attention to specific phrasing. You said, I had not been seriously arrested. Were there any arrests in your background other than shooting out a light?
No. In high school, I was arrested twice. Both of them at parties. Both of them relatively minor things where I was, it was more just being at a party. But I did not get arrested for anything serious. The story about shooting out the light is a story we can talk about if you want. But that was in college, and again, one of these stupid things you do when you're drinking that showed a lack of judgment. But I lucked out on all of that, and fortunately, by the time I was able to apply to law school, I didn't have any criminal career or criminal background that affected my ability to not only go to law school, but pass the bar and become a lawyer.
One of the other things that becomes apparent in your fraternity in terms of the people that you're surrounded by is while everyone may have been hard-charging, hard-partying people, every one of your fraternity brothers seemed to have been very successful.
Yeah, we had a really successful class. We were the fraternity that I joined, and I came in my junior year. But fortunately, I moved into a dorm with all of the jocks and the hard drinkers, and Chris Christopherson was down the hall at the end, and the guys that I knew. So they brought me in because I was the kind of the party guy. I wasn't the athlete. I was never an athlete very much, but I had something very important that they didn't have: women. I knew a lot of girls from Citrus, where I'd been in junior college, and so I said, well, what can I bring? I can bring some girls to the party. So I did. So I brought some girls to the party. One of them actually married a fraternity brother of mine, but that kind of got me into them. So that was kind of the route. But I was the jester, the fun guy. And so I loved my fraternity and had a great time. But mostly, I would say there were 14 of us in my class, 8 in Chris Christopherson's class, the class before me. And of my class, I would say 6 or 7 of them became doctors. I was the only one who became a lawyer. All of them went on to get to advanced degrees and did well.
Well, we're talking about the partying side. You mentioned that alcohol helped you become an extrovert. Do you think of yourself without a substance? Are you more introverted, more extroverted? Has it changed over the course of your life?
Well, everything changed when I quit drinking. And if we want to talk about that, we can chat about that. But no, I changed significantly. I think I became more serious. When I was drinking, I used to love to tell jokes, and I was good at telling jokes. As a matter of fact, I had a little address book in my pocket, and when I'd start drinking, I couldn't remember the jokes very well, but I had them all written down with a thing. So I'd say, I got to take a leak, and I'd go in there and I'd come up with some more jokes, and I could come out and tell more jokes. And so, I was kind of the life of party guy, but that changed when I became much more serious when I quit drinking. I really went on a serious path and decided that I needed to ask the question that we all need to ask, and that is, what's your life about? What's the purpose of your life? Where are you going? And I answered that from my satisfaction a long time ago, and I feel very comfortable about that. But no, I think I'm a different guy than I was when I was drinking.
Do you want to talk about that now, or should we put a pin in that, go through a little bit of your career, and then visit it when we talk about?
Probably be better to talk about it. Let me kind of give you the chronology of how I think it happened. At some stage, you're a social drinker, and I was a social drinker. Now, keep in mind, I had alcoholism in my family all along. I come from a Mormon background, but my father, my uncle, my grandfather are all 11 times more likely to be an alcoholic than that. So, but I kidded myself because I thought I would never become an alcoholic because I was smarter than they were. None of them went to college. I had a college degree. I had an advanced college degree. I'm a lawyer. So I kind of joked myself that I wouldn't have the same problem they did. But there came a time when I was in the district attorney's office for 4 years,
This is down Ventura.
In Ventura, and I tried 40 jury trials to verdict. And then when I started trying cases, I came up with an old firm called the Nicholas Williams Morgan Gardy. That was kind of the Oakland walk-up firm, and they were the big firm that did this. And I started trying case after case after case. And by the time I'd been in practice, well, by 1976, I've been in practice 14, 15 years. I certified that I tried 100 jury trials to verdict. But case after case, I went through a divorce, had fertility problems, ended up adopting 2 kids, wonderful second marriage. But the stress of trying case after case, the stress, particularly when I had to form my own law firm and my old firm broke up, the stress hit me more. And my drinking changed, Miles, from wanting a drink to needing a drink. And that's that critical point where all of a sudden I felt that I needed to go over and get a pop or two before I went home. Then I started drinking more. Fortunately, I never let it totally interfere with my practice of law, but I was heading down that path. But I was really, I really began to drink for stress. And I think that's the key point, at least from my life, of going from a social drinker to a problem drinker. And that's when you begin to drink for stress. And I was drinking for stress. And so things went bad for me. And my wife was ready to leave me. I was not being a very good husband, quite frankly. And I've been very honest about that. In 1984, I formed my own firm. I was really struggling, and my drinking had changed. I used to drink martinis, and I could drink a lot of them. And then I wasn't reacting very well to them. I was a Scotch drinker, and I began to realize I couldn't drink Scotch. My liver was giving out on me, and I was really struggling. And my doctor said, you're going to get cirrhosis of the liver. I knew I had a serious alcohol problem, but I didn't want to quit. The reason I didn't want to quit, Miles, is that everything I'd ever done had been alcohol fun. How the hell could I go to a Raiders game? And I was a big Raiders fan. How could I go out and party with my buddies at night? How could I even play cards, whatever we wanted to play? I could not imagine a life without alcohol that would mean anything. And I was afraid that I would never have fun again. But the time came when my wife, bless her heart, my second wife, went to some people and said, Gary's in trouble. And so I had one of the really early interventions in 1984.
Was this officially the other bar? Had the other bar started by then?
Well, Ed Caldwell was doing it, yes. The other bar was a part of it, although I'm not sure. I didn't go to the other bar per se, but they were definitely a part of it. So what happened, I've told the story many times, it's in sort of a humorous way. My wife one day said, well, we're going to go have dinner with the Potters, who's friends of ours over the peninsula, and we're going to go to a little restaurant out on Hagenberger, and they're about halfway. And I said, that's fine. And she said, we're going to meet them early, 5:30. It was a little early for us. And I said, that's fine. So we go into there, and I start to walk in, and I said, start to go in the bar. And she says, no, we're meeting them in the coffee shop. And I said to myself, we're meeting the Potters at the coffee shop? So she gently guides me in, and I walk over, and coffee shop's pretty much empty. And over in the corner's 4 guys sitting there, and she guides me over, and I recognize one of my former partners, Bill Gibbs, and I recognize a guy named Ed Caldwell I kind of know, and somebody else I didn't know, and I'm looking at them saying, what the hell's going on here? And Liz says, Gary, these guys want to talk about drinking. I said, I love talking about drinking. Let's go in the bar. You don't talk about drinking in the coffee shop. Well, they sat down and went through a discussion with me about how I was really in serious trouble. And my reaction was my ego got involved in it, and I got very angry. And I remember turning to them and all of them, and I said, I want to ask you a question. Do you think you're getting better verdicts than I am? Do you think you're a better lawyer than I am? I mean, I got into my ego shit, and I was pissed off. And so I said, F this guy, and we're leaving. So I said to Liz, we walked out. So I was with him for maybe a half an hour. So we drove home in stony silence. Didn't say a word. And we go into the house. I'll never forget this, Miles. I put this in my, I'll never forget what I said. I turned to my wife and I said, well, you don't expect me not to have a drink after this, do you? Like poor Gary deserves a drink. And so I walked into the front room, and little Liz, who I knew was getting ready to leave me, was in the bedroom and she was crying. And I poured myself a scotch. It was a cutty and soda, and I drank it. And I started pouring myself a second one, and it didn't taste good. It didn't feel good. And so I walked into my wife and I said, I'm going to tell you something, Liz. I'm going to tell you something I've never said before. I've never said this word before. I am going to quit drinking right now. Because I felt, Miles, like that. I felt like I'd been slapped in the face by that intervention. That all of a sudden, I wasn't kidding myself. I wasn't kidding anybody else. I knew I had a problem and I had to deal with it. And I did not want my wife to leave me. So we packed up and went to Hawaii. We had a nice trip planned over there, came back. And then I was worried about what was going to happen the next time we went to a party. You know, I mean, Gary's not drinking, and that's like what? It's like an oxymoron. So we go to a party and I'm pour myself a soda and this I'm drinking, and people ignore me. And I realized they don't give a damn what I'm drinking. They care about what they're drinking. And so, all of a sudden life completely changed. And I realized, I can have a hell of a lot of fun at this party and I can remember it. So that's the true story of how I dramatically changed my life due to that intervention. I give Ed Caldwell, bless his soul, has been gone 7 years, almost 8, And my wife is also gone, my second wife, but she saved my life. And we ultimately divorced, but we always remained good friends up until the time she died of a brain cancer. And my spirit is still with her, but I needed my life saved.
You are fortunate that you had so many people who loved you that much to be willing to speak truth to you.
That's true. I did. I had a lot of good support. And I had support of my firm, and they were with me on that. So I had a lot of support. And I didn't go all the way down to the bottom. I didn't hit the bottom floor. I was still a functioning alcoholic. I didn't really miss a lot of work. My health had been pretty good. My wife kept me fed all right. So I wasn't to the point where I was drinking instead of eating, but my life changed so dramatically. It was just quite amazing.
If you're enjoying what we're doing here with Cooper's Code, please help us extend our reach by giving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and consider sharing an episode with a friend. Additionally, we want to know who you want to hear on the show. Have an interview suggestion? Email us at podcast@coopers.law. We fast forwarded a bit through your career in order to take a deep dive into that topic. I'd like to back up a little bit to talk a little bit about your experience with the Ventura District Attorney's Office and in particular prosecution of what was then a relatively new type of prosecution in terms of child abuse. That sounds like an area where you developed a certain expertise.
What had happened was that the law changed. There used to be immunity from criminal prosecution for people who reported it, but they were still afraid. And the law changed about the time that I was getting into and trying serious felonies, when they also had immunity from civil prosecution. And because of that, the doctors and a lot of the care providers began to report child abuse in a much different way than they did. And so we began to prosecute them, whereas before it would have been difficult to prosecute them. So I prosecuted some of the early child abuse cases, and it was very satisfying to me. And, it was something that was kind of a precursor later in life, because I felt my job as a criminal prosecutor was very similar to my job as a civil prosecutor. And so I loved my job at the DA's office, but once we lost the set of quadruplets, my wife and I, which was pretty life-changing, she wanted to leave Ventura, and I was glad to come up to Bay Area. So we came up, and then I joined the firm, and I've loved being a trial lawyer every day since the day I walked in trying cases. It's been that's what my soul is all about.
Can you describe the transition? And Because we had a conversation before we were on microphone, and you did just a sentence related to some fertility issues that I'm aware of, and you ended up having quadruplets.
Yeah. Fertility problems came on early to me. And um, so when we got married, things weren't happening. And so we ended up going to the Tyler Clinic. I was in Ventura. And that was one of the early fertility clinics connected to UCLA in downtown Los Angeles. And so after a period of time, it became clear that my sperm count was very low and it wasn't going to do it. So we did some, we had donor insemination, which was really quite new. This one is in 65. So this was kind of new stuff. So what they did to help along was they gave my wife a hormone that had let her get out extra eggs from the fallopian tube. And so she became pregnant, and by the time we got too far into, about 6 or 7 months of the pregnancy, it became clear that she had a set of quadruplets. And so, unfortunately, there had never been a set of quadruplets born in Ventura County. It was a new thing, and they really didn't know quite how to deal with it. Nowadays, they would immediately put her down and rest, but they didn't do that. And because of that, when you have 4 babies, then the mother wants to begin to begin at early labor, and that's what happened to her. So ultimately, there was nothing we could do about it. She ultimately went in the hospital. So we had 4 infants, ranging from about 1 pound 9, I think was the biggest, 1 pound 6. Today, those infants could survive, but at that time, they didn't survive. It was the first set of quadruplets born in Ventura County. We got some publicity. But immediately after the birth, there was 3 girls and 1 boy. And the girls all immediately died, but the boy survived. We were in a position where we knew that they were all going to die. And we'd been through so much of this. Our relationship was starting to deteriorate. So my wife was still in the delivery room, and I went in to see the one surviving child. And I walked into this room, and there was something called an isolate. I'd never seen it. And they had this thing with this very tiny baby boy in there. And I looked down at him, and, and that was my son, the only son I've ever had. And he was dying, and he wasn't going to live very long, and there was nothing I could do about it. Nothing. But just sit there and look at them. And Miles, what I did then was I went home and opened a bottle of scotch. And I started drinking. And I said, there's 2 ways I can get through this, and that's drinking and working. And that's what I did. We didn't get any therapy, we didn't get any help. Our marriage deteriorated very badly. And so it was a very difficult experience. And I do appreciate people that have fertility problems, because I recognize how painful and difficult it can be when you have to go through this artificial process to have children, when sex should have somebody fun, and having a baby should be a wonderful thing,
One of the things that we have to do in our job is help others understand the pain, the loss, the tragedy that people go through. Do you think that this had any impact in terms of your ability to pivot from being a district attorney to being a successful plaintiff's trial lawyer?
I think the whole group of experience, I changed significantly. And so when I was a prosecutor, I was a hardline Republican. And my parents, coming from Utah, don't ask me why, but my first wife was, her family was very strong into Republican politics. As a matter of fact, I became a Goldwater Republican. I was really into reading a lot of the right-wing stuff at the time, and I became a very right-wing Republican when all my friends were on the other side. And that was true going through college. And, I proudly voted for Goldwater. I voted for Nixon, and I was all right about that. And I left the DA's office and I came to Oakland and I began to practice law. So I think things changed, and I began to pick up much more compassion than I had before. I don't know if that was related so much to the loss of the child as to the fact that I began to see people in a very different light than I had as a prosecutor, where I was putting them away and they were some bad people. I began to recognize what the African community, American community was like. We had so many diverse people, and my politics began to change, and I began to feel very differently about that. And so what I've jokingly said, and there's some truth to this, is I voted Republican for 28 years. And then something important happened in my life. I quit drinking. When I quit drinking, the fog lifted. I turned to the left, and I've never come back. And there's although I'm jesting about that, there's some truth to that. I dramatically changed. Now, it's interesting because I've been on both sides of it, and I don't hate Republicans. I do hate Trump, but that's another story we can talk about. But traditional Republicans, I can understand what their life. I was one of them at one time. It's been interesting to see myself on both sides of things. I've been a hard drinking alcoholic and somebody that's sober. I've been a guy that was pretty superficial in my life to somebody that's gone on a very spiritual journey. I've been a right-wing Republican to becoming a very left-wing person that feels differently. And I think this idea, and being a young man to an older man, I think that I've lived such a complete life. I've kind of seen it all, particularly through my work. It's been a remarkable life, and I thank God and I'm not into religion so much. I'd say I thank the universe every day for this life that I've lived, because it's been just such a fortunate life that I've lived, really. I know I kind of got ahead of myself a little bit, but that's the way I feel about my life.
From an outsider's perspective, it sounds like once you stopped drinking, one of the paths that you followed to help expand your life was to explore spirituality, wellness, other methods of stress relief aside from something that came from a bottle. Is that fair?
Well, I went from that. I'd say I got into the metaphysical stuff. I really got into some, and I didn't ever put this in the book because I thought trial lawyers would think it was too weird. But I not only got into past life, but I got into some deep channeling. I needed to find out as deeply as I could who I really was. And I delved into it in a lot of different ways. And it was very interesting because I really went deep into this whole kind of spiritual thing. And it was very important to me. And at some stage, I realized, from my perspective at least, where I fit within the universe and who I am. Now, we all have to make that journey ourselves. And although I talked about it in my book, I didn't quite go all the way. I don't think I should be telling other people where you need to go on your spiritual journey, because we have to make that trip ourselves. But for me, I went very deep into it, came back out, and then I'm still connected with people who've left me that I loved. Ed Caldwell, my former wife, my former partner, Jim Kioso, my mother very much. I've been in contact with their spirits, and they're part of it. They're part of my life, and I think about that. And this just helps me, I think, stay grounded in terms of who I am, in terms of the universe. But for me, I came out the other end after a few years, found my new soulmate, married her, and I've been on a totally different path ever since. It's like before and after. Once I quit drinking, went on the spiritual path, I really became a different person. I may look the same now that I'm older, but I became a very different person.
For those who are listening to this, who may not want to hear that they have a problem with a substance, but in the back of their mind, it's kind of chewing at them. Like, yeah, people will say some things. I'm the last one leaving the party. Being one of the last people to leave the party, anything you'd share with them about what to do? I
would. One of the articles, one of the topics of some of my more recent talks have been, am I drinking too much, is a rhetorical question. And I pose this. If you look in the mirror and you ask yourself, am I drinking too much? You are. And you need to have some self-honesty about this. Now, people don't want to talk about other people. They want to be in denial. But I don't think there's anybody who's a serious alcoholic that doesn't know they're an alcoholic. The question is how difficult it is to change. For me, it was so difficult because I felt that I could never have fun again. But once you're there, you're there. But it's a very difficult problem for a lot of people. And I feel for them because there but for the grace of God go I. And it's not an easy trip. We each have to do our own thing. I needed this intervention. I needed to realize that I was dying, and I was dying. My liver was giving out. I was going to lose my wife, basically lose my life, and I had to make a choice. Do I want to live or do I want to die? And I chose life, and that was a long time ago, and here I am.
You describe how life is so different before versus after, and the work that you did in terms of what I would describe as a deep dive. Can you put in words for people to understand what it is like in terms of whether what you describe as joy or fulfillment or wholeness or scales removed from the eyes, in terms of the difference before versus after?
Well, at a superficial level, I changed a lot because I didn't feel this need to party and drink all the time. I felt more at ease with myself. I felt more complete in there. And so I didn't feel this need that I needed to go out and drink and prove something to myself. So I came into a stronger position of who I was. But at a much deeper level, I really did need to come to what alcoholics know as the 12th step. And the 12th step is really finding who I am at this deep pleasant. So that's when I needed to take. So the subtitle of my book is A Trialer Finds His Soul. And I didn't put all this stuff in the book because I thought people would think I'm weird enough as it is with the stuff I put in there at the time when I wrote it. But you know, I think I'm a very spiritual person now. And I would never have described myself as that way before. I was a fun person. I was successful. I was doing a lot of fun. But now I'm really just, I wake up every morning. I spend a little time with myself, and every single day I'm very thankful for where I am, and it's a much more complete place, and it's hard to put it into words, I think. But when I say I've changed at every single level, superficial all the way down to the deepest level that we go, and I'm very content with where I am with the universe, and what do you want to call God? And I don't go to church. I'm not into church, but I know very clearly who I am and how I fit into the universe as best I can. We have limitations with our brains, but as a human being, I think I'm pretty much where I need to be.
Thank you for listening, and please join us next week as we continue this conversation. Please email us at podcast@coopers.law with questions, comments, feedback, and suggestions for who we should have on the show. Like what you heard? Share us with a colleague and leave us a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. To all of you doing justice out there, happy hunting.